Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome to the War Room. This is War Room Pandemic. We're on Capitol Hill in the old Breitbart Embassy. It's Saturday, the 30th of May, the year of our Lord 2020. Greg Manns, Jack Maxey, Stephen K. Bannon. We're here for another special. It's a Saturday, and we're Descent into Hell Part 7. Seems like only yesterday we started this, guys. Now we're in the 7th week of doing this. Descent into Hell Part 7, the crisis in Hong Kong. We've got a full show to you today for voices of people from Hong Kong and from mainland China that are here to represent exactly what's going on, what the stakes are in China, what the stakes are for the people of Hong Kong, these amazing patriots. And we've said for it comes up on next 4 June will be the anniversary when Miles Guo and I started doing the broadcast into Hong Kong and into China about this revolt that took place in Hong Kong. It started on a Sunday. It started as a peaceful protest. I think 3 or 4 million people showed up. Hong Kong's only got 7 million. The Chinese Communist Party vapor locked. I mean, they absolutely locked up. And now we're at a centerpiece of a geopolitical crisis. This pandemic, the economic crisis that triggered the financial crisis. Every day of the week, 6 days a week, we're on that in War Room Pandemic. We do these specials to look at it from the lens of the Chinese people that are oppressed by this dictatorship. And on Friday, the President of the United States, yesterday, the President of the United States went into the Rose Garden, flanked by his top advisors. Even got Wilbur Ross up from Florida. Somebody woke Wilbur up. He got Wilbur up to watch this, or to be up there. You had Navarro, had Wilbur Ross, had Mike Pompeo, had Steve Mnuchin, Secretary of Treasury, the starting lineup of the Trump administration. And the president either threw down or didn't throw down hard enough. It's kind of a split decision on what the pundits think. I care what Greg Manns and Jack Maxey think. So Jack, you're an old China hand. You're on December 26th. You're the first guy, the first foreign devil to give a heads up that there was a SARS outbreak somewhere in central China. What do you think? How do you assess what the president did in the Rose Garden?
I don't think anybody's ever heard the president speak this way to China directly. I think he was deadly serious. I don't think that there was any gamesmanship at all. He said, "My announcement today will affect the full range of agreements we have with Hong Kong. Actions to revoke Hong Kong's preferential treatment as a separate customs and travel territory from the rest of China." He said also that he does not think that anything, very little, will be left on the table. He sounds to me like he's out for bear.
You've seen the Committee on the Present Danger. We laid out 12 actions that should be taken, and doing a bonus, which was take the Chinese Communist Party to the Security Council of the United Nations as an emergency. Do you think, and I realize we pride ourselves in being the hawks. We put it out there. How close do you think he came to actually what the Committee on the Present Danger said, which was a full break and an in-your-face cutting off of all capital and all technology?
Well, I think it's coming. The other thing that he said, which should be a wake-up call for everybody, he said that he has directed his people who are in charge of our capital markets to come up with a solution tomorrow, yesterday, for how we're going to get these Chinese companies to either comply with our regulations or delist them.
Greg, you're an expert in politics and political communications. One of the things, you're also a Pennsylvania guy. What the president said, how is that going to play in the heartland of this country for the people with manufacturing jobs, et cetera? Do they take this as just more talk, or is this something they haven't seen before at any president?
This bold action is going to be one of the defining moments of this election cycle.
You think so?
Absolutely. Southwestern Pennsylvania, the Northeast, the jobs that have gone away because of our reliance on China, those people were impacted, and they see this bold action, and they're going to come out in droves.
Now, why is it there's some people saying, hey, Trump was obviously upset. He's got Minneapolis on his mind. He's tried the Twitter thing to divert the attention into Twitter. That's not quite working out, right? He's got this thing that he's CNN's Chiron's got. Trump is suggesting or pushing people to have violence against the protesters or the demonstrators or the looters, however you want to describe it. And all he did, he found an easy punching bag to his buddy Xi, and he went out there and he gave 3, 4, 5 minutes of hot talk and talked about a lot of stuff he's gonna do. Then dropped the mic and walked off with no questions because he didn't want to be pressed on details. And the big tell is the market initially went up. So, Jack Maxey, you're savvy. You worked on Wall Street for many decades, right? In good times and bad.
The market was 350 down when he began talking, and we thought, oh my gosh, this thing's going to slide.
On a Friday afternoon.
On a Friday afternoon where people were a little bit worried because we'd had such a good week, right? You know, people don't want to go into the weekend with all this doubt. And it actually went up. At one point, it was positive. It ended the day down 55. So, or it's now at 55. It's not
But don't they think that that's the tell that this was happy talk?
No, I think that the tell is that this has probably been priced into it. Think about it. A lot of the companies that are getting crushed because of their Chinese exposure have already taken it on the chin. I think that what you're also seeing, and I think that we can take some credit for this, you're starting to see the American people realize that this fight is really about the American character, right? We are a country based upon morality, much as we might pretend not to be when we chase the almighty dollar. But the average American knows that in his heart, this country is based upon morality and that we cannot participate in this criminality in China any longer.
That's a question for you guys. We have said from day one that these are the Patriots of 1775. That these kids are actually giants, and you're gonna meet some of these giants today. The stories are unbelievable. As we prep this show to get ready throughout the week, the stories are absolutely incredible. I mean, I know we've heard some heart-rending stories for the Chinese people on both religious observance of how their day-to-day life is, what it's like to live in back of the firewall, all of that. But today, to hear really from these kids who have been in the street as peaceful protesters, part of the umbrella movement, to some of them are hardcore insurgents today, and they're going to refuse to give up, and you'll hear it from their own voice.
Well, I mean, the guy yesterday who said on our show, it was very moving. I think we're going to hear from him again today. He said, we're never going to give up. We're prepared to die.
Well, he said prepared to die and prepared to take 20 years in prison. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. Are the American people moved by that? Do you think that they understand that this is what this is about, is our values, and that this is a fight for what freedom and democracy has always meant? Or is this what the America First movement was trying to stop, this sucked in? Because didn't we hear some of this from President Bush in the early 2000s? We got to bring democracy to Afghanistan. That didn't work out so well, did it?
Well, I think we're not quite as naive as we were in 2000. I think that we've all realized today we went out there and fought the good fight, but we've realized, I think, that it was probably not the best move that we ever made in history. The American soldier kept his honor. He never lost in the battlefield. We've done this before. We will recover, and I'm glad that we're pulling out, but I think that the wake-up call was, hey, democracy wasn't going to work in Afghanistan when we're controlling it. I do think that many people thought for 20 years that China was going to become more of a reformist country. And we've seen since Xi's been in power for the last, say, 6-7 years, it really has become much more oppressive than it was a decade ago.
Is that us fooling ourselves? I mean, we did the same thing in the Soviets. You go back and look at the great war that President Reagan fought to really bring this to victory, not to just go along with it. You heard when Reagan got there, what you have to do is you have to reach out to the reformers. You have to reach out to the liberals in the Soviet Union. And after it was all over, we realized a lot of that was just fake. That was to get the World Council of Churches and all these peace movements that said, we got to work with these guys because there's really reformers there. And at the end of the day, it's all KGB.
And then we recognize that the World Council of Churches is actually WCKGB, right?
Well, that's my point, that they're all front organizations, but that everything everything that was supposed to be reformer was all either totally phony or had no power. That you have reformers they would send to these Western conferences and make liberals feel better, but they had no stroke inside the Soviet Union, inside the Politburo, inside the decision. Isn't that what they pushed forward Lee He and they pushed forward? Remember, one of the reasons we're in this situation, and President Trump is so angry, for a year and a half, after being the first guy that braced him up, for a year and a half, they worked with him every day on the centerpiece of what his first term accomplishment was going to be, which was the trade deal. Lighthizer-Trump trade deal in May of 2019 was a 200-page document that went into as Navarro calls them, the 7 original sins of the CCP's economy: state-owned industries, the forced technology transfers, everything to do, every different aspect, and they had both visibility, accountability, and enforceability to take care of that and integrate the Chinese Communist Party and their economy into the world system. They walked away from that. They walked away from that. At the same time, they said, we're going to different tech standards. We are essentially going to walk away from this, and we don't care, right? We're going to have a separate system than the West, and it's the West problem.
Well, I think one of the big problems historically is that the American character is somewhat naive. Mainly, I think, because we're optimistic in our nature and we tend to think that other people think like us. I think one of the great things about travel and going around the world is finding out that that's not the case. So I do think that when Americans may start out naive, but when they have their eyes open, they become,
That's really the other 3 turnings. If this is the great 4th turning in the revolution, it took us a long time to get there. 20, 30 years of this thing going back and forth, and it finally reaches a head. Same with the Civil War. Civil War brewed. American people don't want to go to war. Same thing with World War II. I keep reminding people, we didn't declare war on Hitler. He declared war on us. After Pearl Harbor, it wasn't a joint war. It was 2 days later. We still hadn't declared war when Hitler, boom, because the United States has always been very hesitant. Once we go, we're in, right? Once we go, we're in. But it's very slow to kind of anger. And I think the last 20 years of this fiasco in the Middle East has gotten people much more cynical about engagement. Is this Greg Manns? I keep saying this is 1938 and this is Czechoslovakia. If you don't stand up, you do not stand up to the Chinese today, you're going to inexorably be drawn into either Taiwan, the South China Sea, up on the border with India and China. Somewhere you're going to get sucked into some sort of conflict. Do you think it's 1938? Is that a false analogy?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And to expand on what Jack was saying, when America gets punched in the face, we punch back 2 times harder and are decisive in what we do.
Is this a punchback? Is Manns right? Is the president punching back, or is he trying to? Because, hey, the rhetoric was fine, but it was a drop the mic moment, right? He went through a bunch of things, but he didn't say, "I'm pulling out. I'm starting the process." A lot of this was starting the process of. I agree. Coming across his lips, a president of the United States, with the range of things he was talking about, and particularly a lot of this is going against all those guys on Wall Street that are sitting there telling him nonstop, you can't do any of this thing. Is this Greg Manns' hey, you punch me, I'm going to punch you back twice as hard?
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of a problem here is obviously we're not interested in a hot war over Hong Kong. I don't see that happening as strategically, tactically. It doesn't make any sense. But the president's hands are tied because the Congress and the Senate passed a law in December saying that we have till the end of this month. The Secretary of State has to make a determination as to whether or not Hong Kong has autonomy.
Why do you think that ties his hands?
Well, because the president has to follow the law.
Well, I mean, but it should be a benefit. He can sit there and say, "Hey, I've got both houses of Congress." Remember, in December, it was 100-0 in the Senate and 419-1. Thank you, brother Massey out there in Kentucky, from being unanimous.
Well, I think his hands are tied because he's going to have to follow through with what he said. I mean, the law is pretty clear. Pompeo has already certified that they lack autonomy, which is written into the law, and now the president has till the end of the month to pull the trigger.
You're listening to and watching Descent into Hell Part 7. By the way, we've got almost 9 million downloads on the podcast, over 100 million views on all the different distribution platforms. You can get us everywhere: YouTube, Facebook, America's Voice. Also on Newsmax. You can see it everywhere, hear it everywhere. We're ubiquitous throughout the world. G Media, GTV. We'll be broadcasting this later, subtitled in Mandarin. We're also in ham radio, shortwave radio, AM stations all over the world picked up. We want hashtag War Room Pandemic. Let us know. We want your feedback, we want your questions. We're going to return with the voices of Hong Kong in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to War Room Pandemic, A Descent into Hell, Part 7, The Crisis in Hong Kong. Our guest now is, and let me, right before we're going to bring in Jack Leung, he's a pro-democracy movement frontline protester. That's his nom de jour, so it's not his real name. But before we bring Jack in, I just want Maxie and Greg Manns. Yesterday, the president in the Rose Garden has been kind of controversial. Some people said, hey, it's fantastic. It's the first time any president's really confronted these guys. Other people saying, it was nice, but it's more Trump. Trump's a lot of talk, not a lot of action. Jack, the specifics that excited you, because you're sitting there saying, hey, I really liked what I heard from President Trump. I liked his demeanor. I liked the drop mic, right? This is it. Boom. What were the 2 or 3 things that most impressed you?
Well, number one, he pointed out that the whole world was excited that Hong Kong was going to be one country, 2 systems, and there was a lot of optimism about that 25 years ago. He says that the Communist Chinese have dashed that optimism for the world, that they have broken their agreement with the world. I think it's very, very aggressive. You got to remember, this is a guy who's couched every single press conference with discussions of China, with talk about his friendship for Chairman Xi. There was no friendship comments at all.
What did they say? He said something about state security. He said something. What did he say about state security being involved in Hong Kong?
Well, he says that there's a chance that, does this mean that state security is going to expand itself into Hong Kong? And I think that's something very serious that everybody should be worried about. And I'll try and find his direct quote. He says, China claims it is protecting national security, but the truth is that Hong Kong was secure and prosperous as a free society. Beijing's decision reverses all of that, and it extends the reach of China's invasive state security apparatus into what was formerly a bastion of liberty.
A bastion of liberty. Now, I want to talk to one of those patriots right now, Jack Leung. He is, that's his nom de jour. He's from Hong Kong. He's one of the protesters. Talk to us about the tactics of the protesters. You know, what the Chinese Communist Party are telling us, Jack, is that what started out as peaceful became a group of hooligans and a group of criminals. They say that you and your friends are criminals, that you guys are bad guys. The President of the United States is saying, hey, we're seeing the involvement of the state security apparatus of this totalitarian dictatorship now get involved in Hong Kong. Walk our audience through what's the reality, what's the truth.
Okay, so like you said, one of the really interesting things with the protests is for the umbrella movement in 2014 in Hong Kong, there was just a total information blackout in the mainland. They just literally, nobody in the mainland knows about it even today that it happened. There was the only people who would have known were mainlanders in Hong Kong who might have accidentally stumbled across the protests, if you see what I mean. But this time, they made the decision to go public with the mainland Chinese public when the liaison office in Hong Kong, which is kind of, if you imagine it like China's embassy in Hong Kong, was attacked by protesters. And that night, they splashed the photos all over the mainland media, like the photos of the flag being torn down and the emblem being defaced. So in terms of the China-wide thing, that's the sort of key difference. And ever since then, they have just portrayed us as these rioters, basically. But in terms of the reality on the ground, the police are the instigators of every single, violent act that takes place. And it sort of, we never go out sort of seeking to do any of this or anything like that. It's always something that is done. Self-defense is the wrong word, but it's done in reaction to the police, if you see what I mean. So, we don't sort of, with Molotov cocktails, etc., we don't throw them because we want to see a police officer, get hurt or burned by them. We do it as a reflex response to stop them arresting us, to stop them, being able to break us up so easily. That's the sort of reality of things and why they turn violent. Yeah.
So here's what, for this, we have a world audience here, and particularly a very strong audience in the United States, and then later in the day in mainland China when it gets blown through the firewall. Walk us through, you're a young man in his early 20s. You've told me in prepping for this show that a lot of the people you see out there are 16, 17, 18 years old. How did this young group of people, when in the rest of the world, young people are tough to motivate towards politics? I've spent many years in Hong Kong. The one thing that always got me about Hong Kong, they were totally apolitical. They only were worried about one thing: working, family, and making money. Okay? Walk us through your journey. How did you get involved in this, and how did you become one of the leaders in this?
Well, you're absolutely right, first of all, about there's a sort of stereotype of Hong Kong as a sort of famously pragmatic, right? And it's a very accurate stereotype in terms of the history. It's very, very accurate. And so my previous involvement prior to June, when the protest started last year, I used to work for a pro-democracy political party during my summers, because I'm still at university, but like, I used to do a lot of work for them. And then when the protest sort of started and, took a sort of violent turn, I grouped up with some of my friends who I was at school with. And I spoke on your show yesterday how basically the way I would always describe our organization of frontliners is it's the same with insurgent groups in terms of a cell structure, right? So the only frontline activists that I know are the people who I went to school with, who I've, made contact with and, are out on the front line with. I don't know anybody else at all.
Hold on, hang on, because this is going to blow people's heads up. You've had millions of people in peaceful protest, but there have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, out there in the protests that turn violent because of police activity, and then what we call the insurgency. And the Chinese Communist Party continues to tell the world this is an organized. You got Miles Guo, you got Steve Bannon, you got the black hand of the CIA, you got British military intelligence. This is foreigners. In fact, the national security law specifically that they're coming up with says this is to keep the foreign devils out, the foreign intelligence services out that are helping organize these naive kids. And that a lot of these naive kids are really a criminal element that are very organized. You're telling our audience that this is basically what we call in economics a self-organizing system, that you don't know really more than your own cell of 6 or 8 schoolmates, the lads that kind of hang together. You also have your thing that in these hundreds of thousands, they're made up of little cells of 6 to 8 people.
So the frontline cells are, and there aren't hundreds of thousands of frontline protesters. The sort of number I would put it at might be sort of anywhere from sort of 5,000 to 10,000 would be a sort of estimate, maybe sort of 20,000 as an upper bound. But yeah, I don't know anyone else who is like a frontliner in this sense. And like I say, it's just like with insurgent groups in terms of, whether it's Islamist groups in the West, so, ISIS or anything like that, they operate in cells because, otherwise the state will just crush you. They can infiltrate, etc. So that's why we do it in that sense.
But you're fighting for democracy. You're fighting for the original deal. But state security, they're saying you're guilty of sedition. You're guilty of sedition against China as a country. You're guilty of sedition against the Chinese Communist Party, that you're ungrateful and that you 10 or 20,000 at the very vanguard have led other naive students into this. What's your response to that?
Well, it's just ridiculous. And also, sorry, I didn't actually address your foreign forces point. I've really got to do that in the last question. I mean, it is just such a ludicrous accusation to make. Because the thing is as well, where they say with the CIA, as if the CIA doesn't have Asian guys working for them who could blend in on the front lines with us. Do you know what I mean? It's just so ridiculous. They think, oh yeah, they're going to pick this all-American white guy or whatever, something like that. It's just a ridiculous accusation. But no, of course, the evidence that state media produces is literally their evidence is, oh, look, here's a picture of a white guy at the protest. And it might be a journalist, it might be a bystander. It's just, do you know what I mean? It's just so ridiculous. And there was a great thing I saw the other day, because they always try and pull the silent majority card on us, right? Which is just rubbish on so many levels. So I can explain to you recent survey statistics from the government's own reports, which demonstrate that that's just complete horseshit, really. But one thing that I thought I saw on social media the other day, which was really good, is, they just had the National People's Congress gathering in Beijing. They got a photo of the Hong Kong delegates to their outside, I think it was the hotel that they were staying in, with a big banner saying, "We support the national security law." And there was someone put on one of our social media sites in Hong Kong, it's a picture of like 100 guys in suits, and Global Times is describing it as Hong Kong society, and then a photo of 2 million people on the streets, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, Western organized radicals." Like, it's just it really made me laugh. Like, and it's so true. You know what I mean? It's so true. This very funny.
Let's talk about this. What they did in Beijing with the Hong Kong contingent. They passed these national security laws. It's really arrest first, question later. Is that the reality? That has been positioned by you guys. Is that the reality of what the CCP is going to do now?
Well, yes. So you've got to remember, obviously, the protests have been paused during the pandemic for obvious, reasons. And because obviously it started in China, and Hong Kong is obviously right on the edge of mainland. So we rode that first wave, as it were. But basically, the policing tactics over the course of the protest last year was getting towards arresting more and more people. And just a couple of days ago, as the protest basically resumed in response to the new national security laws being passed, the security operation outside the Legislative Council, where actually the new proposed national anthem law was being debated, so inside our Congress, basically, our Legislative Council, I cannot even describe to you. You can go on Twitter or social media and look at the policing operation. They literally, for blocks, just walled it off. So they made any attempt to disrupt the meeting, because we stormed the Legislative Council in July of last year, and people wanted to basically do it again to stop the law passing by literally like physically invading the chamber, right? But we weren't able to because of the policing operation. It was just tens of thousands of officers. Like, Hong Kong is one of the largest police forces ratio to the population in the entire planet. Like, we've got 6 million people, and I think it's 30-something thousand officers.
Hey, Jack, we got to take a short commercial break. When you hang with it, Jack Lund from Hong Kong, part of the vanguard of the protest movement of the insurgency. This is Stephen K. Bannon. Descent into Hell, Part 7: The Crisis in Hong Kong. It is Saturday, 30 May, the year of our Lord 2020. We'll be back in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Fortune favors boldness. You're going to hear from a lot of bold people today. This is very uncertain times. And in uncertain times, entrepreneurs thrive. The way you thrive is to have the tools at your disposal to help you become a success. NetSuite by Oracle, the world's #1 cloud business system. They are the sponsors of War Room Pandemic. We're very honored to have them. We get approached by a lot of people, but we wanted to partner with them because of the simple reason that they're out there to help entrepreneurs. And the only way we're going to get through this on a global basis is entrepreneurship. One of the greatest places in the world for entrepreneurs is Hong Kong. It's incredibly sad what has gone on there. Jimmy Lai and some of Jimmy Lai's partners, we've actually got a tape we're going to try to play in the next segment. This heartfelt, really thanks to the young people of Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai was in on 60 Minutes back in, I think, October or November. And Jimmy Lai, as you know, he's been, the guys have been on our show many times, of Apple News, the paper, the Chinese language paper, CCP paper in both Hong Kong and Taiwan. Jimmy Lai said that we have failed. Our generation failed. We did not take the Communist Party on, the CCP, after the signing of the deal. We knew they were going to try to retrade us. We allowed them to go bite by bite, what the communists have always done and the fascists have always done. Take a little bite, take a little more. We didn't stop them. We didn't stand up to them as they eroded our liberties, eroded our freedoms. And when push came to shove a year ago in the Tiananmen Square, remember, 4 June is the anniversary. It was the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. And in the United States, you had small kind of commemorations of it by some of the Chinese expatriates. You didn't have a big outpouring. One of the reasons is I think Nancy Pelosi, a lot of people in the back of that movement, whether it was Trump derangement syndrome or whatever it was, kind of lost momentum. And obviously in Beijing and in China, you had nothing. In Hong Kong, millions of people took to the streets. And what happened, that became a more active protest. The police started to crack down on it. The PLA got brought in. It became an insurgency. And in this, Jimmy Lai said on 60 Minutes, he broke down and cried and said, we didn't have the guts to stand up to them. The young people did. The young people stood up to the Chinese Communist Party, and they're eventually going to win their freedom. This video, that hopefully we can't show you on AVN or on Newsmax, we're going to play the audio. Jimmy Lai's one of his other partners, a guy looks like in his 70s and 80s, has an incredibly moving video. And what he says is he talks about the fact of high school and college kids that would not buckle. And if you see this video, it's shocking. The beatings, the rubber bullets, all that. We can play the video. Let's try to. Can we play it right now? Let's play this video right now. It's incredibly moving. Our team at AVN. Let's go ahead and roll.
Mr. President, I want to thank my friend Jimmy Lai for producing and delivering this YouTube letter to you on behalf of all the free citizens of Hong Kong. The video you are watching now is showing the little-known leaders of the Hong Kong's heroic freedom movement for the last 12 months. These teenagers are mainly high school and college kids. They are fighting to make Hong Kong a home of freedom, democracy, and rule of law, no different from the founding fathers of the United States of America. 9,000 of them were arrested, all of them beaten, some raped and murdered, and all of them are waiting to be prosecuted. They will not be able to finish their education and will never land a decent job in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, out of the 1.4 billion Chinese, only these few thousand kids have the guts to stand up and fight and sacrifice for the universal value held by the free world.
This is what this is about. I mean, this is incredible.
It's hard not to get choked up.
It's a handful. It's a couple of thousand high school and college kids, Jack Leung being part of them. Look at that video. We're going to play that again later. They're beaten like dogs, rubber bullets, gas, tear gassed, rubber hoses, right? Water cannons. And he said 1.4 billion people, and he included himself and Jimmy Lai in that only these kids had it. And this is a victory. What happened in the Rose Garden yesterday, the start of this process, Greg Mann's talked about people in Southwest Pennsylvania. Your jobs have been ripped out because of Wall Street and the global corporations. Finally, a president of the United States, and some people said it wasn't enough, but it's a start. He got up there in the Rose Garden and said, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. The reason is those couple of thousand kids ripped the mask off so the whole world can see what the Chinese Communist Party is about. Wall Street, their media minions, their spin meisters, their lobbyists, all the money they've put in here, all the lies they've told for decade after decade after decade, and we've accepted it. And what stopped it? Jack Leung and these kids. And you see that video. They're beaten like dogs. And what did Jimmy Lai's partner say? He said they're not going to give up. They would not back down.
And Jimmy Lai, in his message before the video, was quite impressive, too. He said, Mr. President, Hong Kong needs help. And we are looking forward to the day the world stands together against the oppressive CCP regime. God bless every one of us.
Well, I want to go back to Jack Leung, and who's one of at the vanguard of this resistance and fighting. And I say these guys are the patriots like 1775. You've read the legends and heroics of Paul Revere and Sam Adams and John Adams and President Washington, George Washington, right? All of it that stood against the British. And now you're seeing a real hero. You can't see him because we can't show his face because his family will be locked up and put in prison. This is the kind of guys we're dealing with, right? You can't see, they can't use his real name. You can't use his real name because his family will be locked up. He's not afraid of himself. He said on our show yesterday, I'll die for this. He says, I know I'll probably end up going to prison for 20 years. But he's fighting for freedom, right? How many kids in this country, the volunteers who go overseas are fabulous. My daughter was in the 101st Airborne. The kids at West Point, they're amazing. How many other kids would take to the streets to actually fight for freedom? This is what this guy did against the totalitarian dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party. Jack, you heard the President of the United States in the Rose Garden yesterday. Be blunt. Is that tell us? Is that help your cause in Hong Kong? Is that what you were looking for? Is that the message that you want to see from the West and from the President of the United States?
Well, yes, it's a great start. I would say it's a really great start. He really did let rip, like quite apart from any of the announcements and stuff. Like he really didn't mess around. And the special trade status ending, that's it's a painful pill to swallow. I take no sort of relish in watching Hong Kong's economy get trashed, which is what's going to happen. To be honest, I take no sort of I don't relish that at all. We have no natural resources in Hong Kong. We're just a trading port, so we don't have anything to fall back on. We are just a financial services hub and sort of spin-off industries from that. But just on that, we need help clearly from the West. And that's something we need. But I would say one thing, that we're under no illusions that if we are going to, as our sort of the slogan of the protest, liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our time, if we are going to liberate Hong Kong, we're under no illusions that we have to do this ourselves, right? They're not going to be, United States Marines sort of being parachuted into Hong Kong to do it for us, right? We're under absolutely no illusions. We're not asking for that either, right? But what we're saying is that, the West needs to basically stand against the CCP and draw up battle lines and make it very clear. I said to you yesterday that we need to move from the language, and the West needs to move from the language of we are concerned about this, we are concerned about, freedom being dissipated in Hong Kong, to actually language of saying we will not tolerate this anymore. And if you do pursue this, then you will pay a very heavy price, whether it's economic or otherwise. And the great thing with President Trump is as a president who's prepared to sort of, really sound off sometimes, make some threats and stuff. Like, this is something that, other world leaders won't do and other past presidents. And people will criticize him for sometimes. But, why not actually just turn up the rhetoric a bit with China when it comes to Hong Kong? Because he hasn't done it yet, actually. He's done it with China, but he hasn't done it in Hong Kong yet. And a real threat would not go amiss. I tell you that. It really would not go amiss.
Jack, let me ask you, the foreign policy establishment, Richard Haas and all these great thinkers, and they're saying, well, it should be a graduated response. You shouldn't overreact here. We're concerned. What we heard the whole last week is that we're very concerned with this national security law.
Yeah.
So those are all those are all our betters. Those are all the guys who say, hey, Bannon's always got his hair on fire. He's got this this podcast and he's talking to these guys, but this is another group of right-wing nuts that have hooked up with a bad element in Hong Kong. What we should do as a country is be concerned. We should start to monitor this. What would you say to the foreign policy establishment in the United States that has allowed the Chinese Communist threat to all free people metastasize over the last couple of decades?
Well, I say that at every turn they've been wrong, haven't they? Like the whole point when after the Tiananmen massacre, when the door was opened again to China in the early 90s to sort of, eventually leading to joining the WTO and other things, like the whole idea. And I remember Bill Clinton, the rationale for the policy was, well, if we open the door to China in this, they will be encouraged to democratize and they will go down the road of reform and stuff. And I wouldn't say it was a terrible idea to do that at the time. Like there was a logic to it and everything, and it was certainly, economically looked beneficial to the US, I guess. But clearly that has failed. The policy of engagement has failed. And, there's a difference between calling for a war with China and actually saying that, the West needs to adopt a policy that recognizes the regime for what it is. I have got friends of mine who, are in prison and are facing charges and stuff, some for relatively minor offenses and some for offenses like rioting charges that will see them in prison for 10 years. And, and this is the reality of this regime, like what's happening in Xinjiang. One of the slogans we say in Hong Kong is, Xinjiang yesterday, Hong Kong today, and maybe Taiwan tomorrow. Like, who knows what the future holds for them. And, they've got a great president in President Tsai who takes no crap when it comes to China, But yeah, like, I think that the foreign policy establishment in the West should just sort of maybe just accept they've called it completely wrong in the past, and they just need to sort of accept that the policy of engagement has just failed. It just completely failed.
We want you to stay over for another segment, but we've got about a minute for you here in this segment. When you say fail, okay, was this willful blindness? Or I tell you what, let's hold that and we'll get to that. I want to know if it was willful blindness of our political elites. This is a War Room Pandemic. You can get to us by hashtag War Room Pandemic. We want to hear your voice. This is Descent into Hell. This is the 7th edition. The crisis in Hong Kong. We have a one of the leaders of the insurgency, one of the leaders of the cell, Jack Lung, is on the phone with us. We're going to return in just a minute. We're going to get to many more voices from Hong Kong in the next hour. Stephen K. Bannon, Jack Maxey, Greg Manns will be back in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Fortune favors boldness. We're now in an incredibly uncertain time, and that means that you need to get the tools to mitigate risk. One of the tools of that is NetSuite by Oracle. If you're an entrepreneur, if your company is $1 million to $100 million in revenue, you need this tool. Even more, even if you're bigger than that, you need this tool. Remember, Oracle and NetSuite is the biggest software system on online and in the cloud. And so they've got a 7-part analysis of as an entrepreneur, actions you need to take today. Go to netsuite.com/Bannon. It's up on the website. Go right there. Even if you don't have your own business today, you're thinking of doing it. NetSuite's the tool you're going to want to use. It walks you through how you have to think and what do you got to think about as an entrepreneur, from your financial modeling to your capital asset allocation and everything in between. NetSuite by Oracle. Okay, we got Jack Lung on from Hong Kong, a great hero. We're going to play the tape at the top of the hour again. Jack, Max, I know you've had a question you've been wanting to ask Jack Lung.
Jack, this is Jack here. Listen, I was curious to know, because I really have felt that our students in America, our young people in America, have not been made aware effectively about what's going on in Hong Kong. What can we do to bring your peers in America on our college campuses into the fold so that they can help you in this fight? Is there something, the message that you would like to give to them?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure, to be honest. Like, there are lots of Hong Kongers at pretty much every American university, and there's been a lot of awareness raising. Like, so I've just spent, because I'm currently right now in the UK, I've just done a semester abroad at a UK university. I'm a Hong Kong University student at University of Hong Kong, but I've just done a semester abroad. And I was amazed, like, the activism that we have on campus of Hong Kong students raising awareness of the situation. And so, you know, I think more of that at every American college campus, because, you know, we have these like political causes on campus, right, in the West that are like celebrated things. Like you have, what's the organization? Is it Turning Point in the US? Like the
yes,
thing.
Turning Point USA.
Yeah, like I vaguely follow it and stuff. But like, I know that's an organization as opposed to a cause. But, you know, you have these kind of, you know, popular student causes and stuff. And like, I just, you know, hope that as the mainstream media continues to cover it, it becomes one of the sort of premier human rights issues in the world, which it should be for, you know, everyone. And for a lot of people it is. But like, as to something specific, I'm not sure what you can really do with students apart from awareness raising, as it were. But it's a great question. Thanks.
In the UK, we've seen a lot of this in the United States, and we've had Hong Kong students actually talk to us and complain that the mainland students literally attack them and make rumors about them, tell the other American students that that kid can't be relied upon, he's crazy, what he's talking about is wrong. And, you know, our students are not necessarily the brightest bulbs, and they buy into what these mainland students are saying about the Hong Kong protests. Have you seen this kind of pushback in the UK on the university campuses by the mainland students against the Hong Kong students?
Well, yes, I have. But I would just say that, like, I think their arguments are so terrible, like the whole pro-Beijing arguments, and also their pitch is really bad as well. Like, they don't know how to make it. So the argument's terrible and the presentation is too. But like, so I don't, you know, it's really like only a few randomers on like the internet actually believe them. Like, we are talking like 0.01%, I think, of the population actually believe that argument. But in terms of the actual pushback, like, yeah, most mainland Chinese view us as like rioters and terrorists. Like, that is the rhetoric. And you can't blame them for thinking that if you like analyze the, you know, the media coverage, both on social media, through the state-owned media, and even the non-state media in China, because it's all, the line is the same, even if it's not state-owned, right? And, you know, you can't blame these
Look,
people.
part of the part of the line that they're using with the new laws they're putting in national security, Jack, they say they're going to break you guys. That they're going to break you. You guys are going to just crack this summer. You're going to try to have some resistance. You're going to crack this summer, no matter what the video says. And Martin Lai and these guys, all your heroism to date is not going to mean anything because they're going to break you. What do you say? What do you and the other insurgents say to that?
Well, I say this, right, and it sounds like a cliche, but I say just look at the past evidence, right, which is that every time they double down and they try and, pile more sort of, stones on our back and break us, all it does is just makes us angrier and angrier and angrier and makes our resolve even stronger. There is nothing that they could do. They could, even try and deploy the army or anything on the streets. And, our motto as well is be water. Like, we're not kamikaze sort of bombers. Like, so last week when the police presence outside the Legislative Council was like over 10,000 police officers and like barricades for blocks and blocks, we knew we were not going to get anywhere near the Legislative Council building that day. So we didn't go there. It's quite simple. Like, we're not stupid or suicidal in that sense. What's the point in loads of us getting arrested if it's not going to serve any purpose, right? So, like I say, if the army were to come to Hong Kong, just for the sake of argument, I think it is quite some way down the line still. Like, I wouldn't say this is not going to happen imminently, but like, suppose the PLA were to come in, right? We would just probably initially just sort of stay at home and see, right, okay, what the hell is going on here? And then you would have like, that American movie, like Red Dawn from the 1980s, like when they're fighting the silver, like really, I mean, seriously, literally like that. It's a great movie, actually. I've watched it a few times, but no, I really mean something like that, like very literally. That's what would happen, like sabotage attacks, that sort of thing. And they would say it was terrorism, but and this is the thing as well, the escalation we will have. There is going to be a massive escalation this summer. There is no doubt about it. If you're asking me what it is, I couldn't tell you because of the cell structure of our movement, right? I have no idea what other activists on the front line are thinking, or how organized they might be or whatever. The one thing I would say is, right, no reasonable person could ever accuse us of terrorism because the defining feature of terrorism is you're targeting civilians, right? And that's just not our target ever. Do you know what I mean? It just, even if you disagree with the violence or whatever, they are legitimate targets, right? The police and, whoever else or whatever. But, it's the idea that any of our escalations could ever be considered by any reasonable person as terrorism is just ludicrous, So that's just, fact, really.
Jack, listen, thank you very much. We'll be watching all summer. You said there's going to be massive resistance to this, massive escalation. So we will watch that. The President of the United States has clearly come out now and said that he's on the side of freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. So we want to thank you. We want to thank you for your heroism and everything that your group does. Jack Long, that's his nom du jour. Another hero in the Hong Kong movement. This is Stephen K. Bannon, Descent into Hell Part 7. This is the special we've been doing every Saturday. War Room Pandemic. Short commercial break. We're going to be back with more voices from Hong Kong in a moment.